All right. Welcome back to the My Sugar-Free Journey podcast, and we are here today with Dr. Andy Phung. So, Dr. Andy Phung is one of the people that I follow on Twitter, and I like to follow people on Twitter and see what people out there are saying. And he's just one of these that has come across my Twitter timeline. I like what he has to say, and so I wanted to get him here on the podcast and find out what he's all about. So, Dr. Phung, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for inviting me. It's my pleasure to come and to share some knowledge about how important it is to change the way we eat.
Yes.
Because we are very sick as a society.
Couldn't agree more. And am I pronouncing that right, Dr. Phung?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Andy,
good.
yes.
Dr. Andy Phung. Yeah. So, I think after this interview, my people are going to want to follow you on Twitter at the very least, because I think that you've got some important things to say. But before we get into what you believe now, let's get into your background a little bit. Where are you from? Where'd you grow up? What made you want to be a doctor? And where did all this start?
Okay, sure. Yeah, I'm currently in North Carolina, Raleigh, North Carolina.
That's by Dr. Jay Wrigley, right?
Jay Wrigley is in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Charlotte, North Carolina.
This is Dr. Westman's territory.
Okay.
Westman.
All right.
Yeah. So, I'm currently going to start my own practice soon. I'm doing direct primary care and going to use nutrition to help people get better.
Fantastic.
I'm just starting the process. I originally I wouldn't say grew up. We immigrated from Vietnam as a child, and then came to America, and then went to high school, and then the Navy, and then the college and medical school, and all that stuff. So.
Well, thank you for your service. That's fantastic. What made you want to be a doctor?
Just to help people, being able to, make a difference, and also trying to, no one have been a doctor in the family, so it's kind of like a challenge, but at the same time, just thought that, you might have what it takes. So.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
The video is interesting. I've got a dog behind me that wanted to cry and get out, and he just had his daughter show up in the back. So, bonus content for you video watchers. So one of the most fascinating parts of any doctor's story that I get on here is they usually follow a very similar type of story where you go to school and you're not taught anything about nutrition. But if you are taught about the people that are obese, you tell them to eat a little less and move a little more and go for a walk after dinner, and that's pretty much the end of it. That transition from that training to a more low carb type belief system it's a big jump. I mean, it really, really is, because you're not just taught that it's one of several ways to eat. You're taught that the low carb lifestyle is dangerous. It's going to give you a heart attack, and it's going to cause all kinds of problems. So this part of the story is the one that I'm most fascinated with anyone that comes on the podcast. What did that transition look like to you?
That transition started actually 4 years ago. I saw my doctor, and then the doctor said, "Hey, Dr. Phung, your A1C is 5.8. And I'm like, what? A 5.8? I'm not obese. And I was just obese in the middle, the skinny fat type guy.
The TOFIs.
The TOFIs, yeah. And then I'm like, oh, wow, that's bad. So, well, what else can you do? So I said, well, better break out my elliptical. And then I was doing an hour every night, for a whole year. And then the weight goes down, the weight goes up, but the A1C dropped from 5.8 to 5.6 after a year, and the weight didn't budge. It was so frustrating. And then kind of funny, and then my sister sent me a link to Dr. Jason Phung, the Canadian Phung, and then the joke was, Andy, do you know that our lost cousin saying that you can reverse diabetes? I'm like, what are you talking about? And she said, no, it's for real. There's a doctor saying you can reverse diabetes. And then in the back of my mind, I was like, this is impossible, because I graduated in 2010. all my continuing medical educations are up to date. I've been to any and all of the conferences that I need, and how come I don't know this, you know? And then so now I've been exercising for a whole year. I've been and I haven't lost weight, and my A1C barely budge.
Right.
And so I'm like, okay, maybe let's just open your mind and go and see what he has to say. And then I was watching the one of the breakdown of the Biggest Loser, and in the process, he said, you know, we've been telling people to eat less and move more, and then it didn't help with the Biggest Loser because they gained back the weight. And I'm like, oh, I know that. And he said, like, well, the reason why they gained back the weight because they were just trying to eat a whole lot less and exercise a whole lot more. I'm like, yeah, I done that too. And then and then eventually it gets to the insulin part, and he said, you know, the reason why they not be able to keep down the weight is because eat less, move more doesn't address insulin. And I'm like, what insulin are you talking about? You know, and then as doctors, we all know that injectable insulin. So if someone has diabetes, it's really, really bad, and the glucose is high, despite oral diabetic medication, then the next thing is you add insulin to bring the glucose down, and that's the current, that's a traditional model. And then I'm like, well, wait, you know, I'm not giving myself insulin, so how come I can't lose the weight? Right. You know, and then he said, you know, there are 3 types of food: carbohydrate, protein, and fat. And I said, I know that. And he said, carbohydrate drives insulin the most. I'm like, oh, wait. Carbohydrate drives insulin the most? He said, yeah, pound per pound, carbohydrate will jack your insulin the highest, followed by protein and least by the fat. And then so I'm like, okay, carbohydrate. I'm Asian descent, so we eat lots of rice and we eat lots of fur, and then we also have lots of fat too. You know, we have the meat and everything else. I'm like, oh my gosh, no wonder I can't lose the weight, because the carb is jacking up my insulin, and then insulin is driving obesity. And then so that was like the first link to me that food, different types of food, was driving insulin differently, and that was like about 3 years ago. And since then I dropped like around 25 pounds. Most of it is right in my middle, and then my A1C last check was actually last week. It's 5.2. It was 5.8 like 3 years ago, and keeping off the weight was easy now. You know, I'm not exercising more. If I'm exercising, just some weightlifting and stuff like that to tone the muscle, but really not to lose weight or anything like that. Everything I do is just to keep the sugar and the refined carbohydrate at bay. So
that's fantastic. So I got a couple questions about your descent. So the first one is, in the people of Asian descent or Oriental descent, I don't know the word for it. Is being a TOFI more prevalent? Because I think it is. I think that it's harder for someone of your descent to put on fat, but we still see the same rates of diabetes.
Oh, actually, the worldwide prevalence in type 2 diabetes, number 1 is actually China right now, followed by India. Okay. I think they are at like 11 or 12%. In America, we are only at 9%. And and the difference between, you know, whether you are fat in the middle or having weight problem overall is that a lot of people will look at an Asian person and say, hey, you're not fat, you must be healthy. And right. It is so misleading. Because, you know, if you're overweight overall, then you can say, oh, darn it, you know I need to do something now because it's so obvious. And if you just carry the excess fat, the visceral fat, it is just as deadly. Very inflammatory, drives diabetes, drives heart disease, drives stroke, drives dementia. You know.
Yep, absolutely. And the other question I have is, you mentioned you eat a lot of rice, or you were eating a lot of rice.
Mm.
There, a lot of times there's a real stumbling block when you tell somebody that the carbohydrates that are associated with their culture, it's a difficult thing to get them to give it up. I don't. The most common one I see in my area, because I'm in Texas, is telling someone of Hispanic descent that they can't have tortillas, they can't have Spanish rice, they can't have the beans. They look at you like, there's no way that I'm eating a diet that doesn't have rice and beans and tortillas. Thank you very much. Goodbye. How did you feel about that, about giving up rice as a part of your diet?
Actually, it wasn't that hard for myself, because I was like, I'm a quote a doctor, so I know insulin, I know how insulin works. So I was like, look, I don't want to jack up my insulin, so that, because it's going to drive my obesity. I'm more pre-diabetic. But it is harder to get the family on board, especially the kids at first, and then the lady, to say, hey, we need to change as a family. And even though you guys are not having problem now, we need to change as a family. And then it takes a lot of, I would say, nudging and teaching too, to say, hey, here's what insulin does. And then so the two most common, so for people who don't know, or they might already know, so it wouldn't hurt to learn it again. So I tell people pound per pound. So we'll say a pound of carbohydrate when you eat will spike the insulin quite high. A pound of protein when we eat will spike insulin somewhere in the middle, and a pound of fat when we eat barely spikes any insulin at all. And if we're not eating, we have a basal insulin. So that's called fasting insulin. And so people are like, well, what does insulin do then? So the two most important function of insulin. The first function of insulin is to stimulate the body to store all the excess food away, including carbohydrates. So because our blood, the whole 5 liters of it only stores 1 teaspoon of blood sugar.
Right.
And then our liver stores roughly 100, let's see, 4 grams, so 100 grams of sugar, and the muscle about another 2 to 300 grams of sugar as glycogen. So, but the point is that the body don't have a lot of room to store carbohydrate. And so any excess carbohydrate that's over the storage capacity get converted into fat. So that is showing up in the blood as triglyceride, and my triglyceride was 300. Yeah. And then so high insulin from the carbohydrate will convert excess glucose into triglyceride. That's new fat. But high insulin also prevents us from burning fat. So insulin inhibits lipolysis. So when insulin spikes, the body can't burn fat. So the problem is, I said, okay, if you eat lots of carb, then what does it do? You're making new fat that you don't want. Right. And then because the insulin's so high, that is preventing you from burning the old fat that you don't need. So right. How are you going to lose weight? The traditional teaching is you are eating way too much and you don't exercise enough. And all that do not really address the insulin problem. So basically, everything we do is to get the insulin down. So I tell people, hey, if you are overweight or pre-diabetic or have metabolic syndrome or have the TOFI physiology, cut down your carb, especially the sugary drinks first, then followed by the starch, and then the fruit might have to come too. But if you don't eat the carb, you have to eat the fat. Right. If you just cut the carb and the fat, now you're going to be really hungry. So you have to do I call it the seesaw. When you lower one, you have to increase the other. So after usually like about 10 days, sometimes up to 3 to 4 weeks, then people would get something called fat adapted. So the body will learn how to burn fat now because there's no sugar. And because when there's no sugar, insulin is really low. So now you're getting fat adapted. And so when you get fat adapted, I'm like, okay, are you ready for the next step? because eating low carb 24/7 is not going to help you lose weight neither if you have weight to lose. We have to add something called intermittent fasting. So basically skipping breakfast. And then so breakfast say is at 6, lunch is at noon, and then say dinner is at 6. And so I tell people, look, after about 2-3 weeks of fat adaptation, so now you can burn fat. Your body learned how to burn fat already. So now just skip breakfast, eat lunch, eat dinner. And then if you search the internet, then people call it time-restricted feeding or intermittent fasting. So you eat at noon, you eat at 6. But when you do eat, make sure you eat until you're full. Don't just eat a little bit. Don't worry about calories. Just eat until you're full, eat until you're satiated, and stopped. And then, and so the key is to get the appetite under control, we have to get the insulin down. And the only way to get the insulin down is to cut the carb down. And once the carb is down, then now we add intermittent fasting to allow the body to burn fat. And then, so some people might need to do like 1 meal a day if they really have a lot of weight to lose.
Yeah, absolutely. And I usually talk about my fasting as the difference between fasting and eating a low carb diet is I eat the low carb diet so I don't gain weight.
Right.
It's the fasting that actually causes weight loss. And that's why I try to do a 3-day fast each week and then intermittent fast the other 4. It really helps to keep my weight down, to keep my insulin down. And that's what I'm working on. So yeah, let's talk about the intermittent fasting because that's yet another step. How did you? I guess Dr. Phung was probably
Dr. Phung, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that was where you found out about that. Good deal.
Yeah.
And then the next step is the difference between you discovering that this works for you versus you actually prescribing it or at least talking about it to a patient.
Yes.
What was that first? What was that the first time you did that like?
I did that about 3 years ago. Okay. So it took me about 3 months to learn the science. And then so basically go to work, try to get through the patient and then start trying to find books. And then so I read both of all 3 of Dr. Phung's book. The Obesity Code was the first one, followed by the Ultimate Guide to Intermittent Fasting. And the last one was the Diabetes Code. And it's actually in Spanish too. So if people don't know, so those books are in Spanish. I don't read Spanish, but in case people don't. And then so after 3 months of learning, I was like, okay, I dropped this 25 pounds now. My A1C is better at like 5.4. So the realization to myself was like, hey, you're a doctor. What are you going to do with your patients? What are you going to do? And then so at first I was like, okay, I know low carb will work with intermittent fasting for diabetic people. So I started working on people with diabetes. I did not know how to titrate insulin at the time, so I was just working with people who were on just oral medication. So I said, okay, if you're on oral medication, I know how to remove your medications. And then so I work with diabetics first, and then I start working with pre-diabetes. And then so just one thing leads to the next, and next thing you know was like, hey, did you know low carb also helps with like ADHD? And people were like, oh, what are you talking about? We're like, oh, ADHD is also a problem with insulin resistance of the brain. So basically, the more you go on to the journey of really understanding the root cause of these chronic diseases, pretty much everything from metabolic syndrome, which is like the earliest, to pre-diabetes, to diabetes, to heart disease, to cancer, and even to Alzheimer's, insulin or hyperinsulinemia, it has its finger in one of those. And all of them are driven by our diet, standard American diet, high sugar, high fat.
Good.
And the fat it's just bad fat. It's polyunsaturated fatty acid. And then people are like, oh, what does it mean? I'm like, It's called vegetable oil, and people are like, what does it mean? I'm like, well, what it really means is if you look at the skeleton of the vegetable oil, it has lots and lots of double bonds, and those double bonds are very susceptible to damage. And once it's damaged, we call it oxidation. And once it's oxidation, it literally is like rusting. And then you need lots of membranes are made of fatty acid, and you don't want your membrane to be rusting. And then so we eat lots of sugar and starch, and we eat the bad oil. And then so it's like, oh gosh, it's just terrible.
Yeah. You know, talking about ADD and ADHD. So I've got two brothers. When they were in junior high, one was diagnosed with ADD and one was diagnosed with ADHD. And the kid with ADD was diagnosed with insanely high cholesterol. And so for years, I'd say probably 4 years, we never ate anything but boneless skin chicken breast and the occasional piece of fish. Like I didn't see red meat.
Wow.
For, you know, probably the whole time I was in high school. And I remember one time my mom, he went and got another cholesterol test, and it was of course high again. My mom's about to pull her hair out because she's, you know, making all this. We're all eating just boneless, skinless chicken breast. And she was talking to me about it. She said, the doctor told me that his cholesterol is so high that his cells might actually be making cholesterol. And that's why his cholesterol is so high. And at the time, that just seemed so terrible to me. I was like, oh, this poor kid, you know, his body's making cholesterol. Yeah. Now I know everyone's body makes cholesterol. And, you know, we handled this problem the exact wrong way. But, you know, it was the best information that they had at the time. But it's been 30 years since that happened. And it's basically the same advice you would get today if you had high cholesterol or ADD or ADHD. Take this medication, take this Ritalin. You know, no one is addressing the root of the issue. And so in my lifetime, I've seen almost zero progress from the medical field on this issue. So I'm glad that somebody out there is at least addressing ADD. I mean, it's a problem. Kids can't focus because they're malnourished. You know, they have what they need to be able to focus on what's going on around them.
Yeah. So it's, the main thing with cholesterol, if people are really worried about cholesterol, because when some people, when they go low carb, high fat, their cholesterol can go up. Yeah. But the mechanism have all been worked out. But the idea is that if you do low carb, high fat, your cholesterol do go up, but the particle distribution, how big your cholesterol particle, the size of those are big and fluffy versus the small and dense. So the small and the dense tend to come from the sugar and the alcohol, and then the big and the fluffy is what come from the healthy, the saturated animal source fat that the low carb, high fat people tend to eat.
Yeah. Absolutely. So have you gotten any pushback in your practice because you're suggesting people do things that aren't a part of the norm?
Of course, when I started, it was like, I'm the black sheep, you know, hey, you know, what are you doing? You know, you're not following the crowd. And then after some time, you know, some other people who also have some weight problem, they benefit some, but the rest of the practitioners are just, well, you know, Andy's the crazy one over there, you know, trying to get people to eat better. You know, that would be kind of stupid because, you know, it's so much easier to just write a prescription and let them go in like 10 minutes. So my visit time is usually about 30 minutes for the patient, versus, you know, you get like 10, 15 minutes, you know, on regular follow-ups. And then even 30 minutes is not enough because, you know, there's so much to learn and so much to undo the wrong teaching.
Right.
But with that said,
but, you know, as opposed to when I first started doing this, at least now there's some books that you can give them and have them read. When I was first doing this, I wasn't anything. You really had to know where to go and what to look for.
It is very true. You know, also, you know, get pushback, especially from endocrinologists.
Oh, yeah.
And then it's that like, hey, you know, the trouble is that is with the endocrinologists is that they are trained in how to use medicine to control glucose.
Right.
And then we're like, well, yes, we are controlling glucose with low carb, which is not putting it in. But in their minds is that, an A1C at say 7 is good. And we're like, yes, it's good. But an A1C of 7 on 3 medications is just as good as someone with an A1C of 7 on no medicine. And obviously we tell people like, look, that is not true. An A1C at 7 with 3 medication, that person will lose the eye. With time, that person will develop diabetic neuropathy and probably lose the foot. The kidney's gonna die and probably gonna have a heart attack and a stroke. But in their minds is that no, an A1C of 7 doesn't matter how you get there, it's the same. And unfortunately, that is the big the big thing that they are in. And when you do get people to low carb, and then and depending on how motivated the patients are, some of them, well, they did well and they gone back, because we call them relapse. And then the endocrinologist will say, see, I told you so. It's not sustainable because people aren't going to do it long term. And it's very true that if patients are not invested in their own health, in this lifestyle, it's next to impossible for the doctors to get them stayed on low carb, because so in my mind is that the only way to get that, or at least to facilitate that, is to get some of the science out there so that people can judge for themselves. But the big picture is no, there is a lot of resistance in the current medical teaching that, hey, why bother with the lifestyle? There's a pill for whatever you have,
Exactly. Now, one of the sources of resistance that I hear occasionally from doctors that are on this podcast is that you get rewarded financially based on the number of prescriptions for certain medications that you prescribe.
That's not quite true. I would say it's not the number of prescriptions that you write, but it's something called they call it the health metric. The idea is that how many diabetic patients you have, mm-hmm. and what is their A1C. And then doesn't matter how you get the A1C to less than 9, as long as it's under 9, it's good. And then what is their blood pressure? And most people would know that low carb will also fix your blood pressure. Right. And then so they basically go through and say, hey, if you have 100 patients who are diabetic, then no more than X amount, like 20 of them have A1C more than 9. And if they are more than 9, then quote, you are a bad doctor. And then so what would you do if you're a doctor who treats diabetes? If your A1C is over 9, and then if the patient's A1C is over 9, then you need to get under 9, and the fastest way is to jack up the insulin to get that sugar down. But it's the totally wrong way to do, because type 2 diabetics, they already have too much insulin already. Jacking the insulin will actually increase the insulin resistance, and that actually leads to the complication even faster. But we are nearsighted as a society. It's like, hey, so for instance, if someone were to come to see me today and they haven't learned much, but we're like, okay, let's get your A1C because you're diabetic. Let's get your A1C for a baseline. And if the A1C is 9.1, and then tomorrow is like turn in your homework, and then so they will say, well, Dr. Phung, your patient's A1C is bad because it's over 9. And I'm like, wait, I just got the patient recently. Well, we don't care. Well, I'm working on their diet. It's going to take a few months, at least 2-3 months to get it down. We don't care. You're still a quote a bad doctor because their A1C is not under 9. And A1C is nothing but a symptoms of uncontrolled sugar. Right. You can mask it with the pills, or you can remove it from your mouth. And then I prefer my patients to remove that sugar from their mouth, and because in the long run they'll lose the weight, they would reduce inflammation, they will reduce the insulin resistance of the brain, because if you just treat diabetics with pills and shots, most of them will end up having Alzheimer's. Actually, it's called diabetes when they lose their mind is actually called diabetic type 3, Alzheimer's of the brain. And then people are like, well, wait, it's why are they losing their mind? We're like, well, it's diabetes. Like, no, it's not. It's like, but like, it's called hypoglucose metabolism of the brain due to insulin resistance of the brain. But certainly, you know, that takes a lot of learning on your own to know these mechanisms. And then, but the traditional way is, no, they just diabetic. They're diabetic for too long, and that's just how it goes. And then, you know, too bad, so sad.
What about the patients that you're seeing? Are you, I mean, obviously some are probably just right on board with you and some are resistant. What is it that you're doing to try to get more into the camp of fixing their health with diet and lifestyle?
So in my room, I make these posters with basically flip the food pyramid upside down, just to show them that, hey, you know, what we had was wrong. And then I also have lots of graphs as far as patients who are adopted the low carb diet, that they have lost the weight and their sugar is better and then the blood pressure is better on the wall as a motivation, you know, without names, you know, so you have to be HIPAA compliant, without names, to say, hey, you know, these are the people who are done it. And then I also have something called root cause. I have like a diagram with the root cause as hyperinsulinemia drives all these chronic diseases. And then if you have one of these diseases, let's fix your hyperinsulinemia. So I measure people's fasting insulin. You know, I measure fasting insulin. I measure advanced cholesterol testing. I measure inflammation markers. I measure basically metabolic function, trying to understand where is the problem in the patient's metabolism, because you need to know that in order to help them.
Fantastic. So the average patient, or you know, the average patient that you deal with, do they get it? Like, do they get it from the first time? Does it take multiple times for them to come in?
It all depends. So for the ones who knows that they are not eating healthy, then I just tell them that, say, hey, you know, I don't know if you know this, you know, we actually done some lab already. Here's here's your insulin's high, your triglycerides high, your HDL is low, and then your high sensitive C-reactive protein is high, your uric acid is high, and then to show them that how bad the diet have been, and tell them, like, look, everything is driven by insulin and insulin resistance, and then tell them like how insulin works, and then I said, okay, here's your homework. So I actually have a list of podcasts from people who talked about this. I have it, and I hand it to them. I also hand them a food list of low carb food, basically like meat and vegetable first, and then make sure they have enough salt in their food because they can have keto flu or sugar withdrawal. And then I'm like, hey, you know, go home, do some learning. You know, I don't have all the time to teach you, but I think once you know that if it's insulin problem and insulin resistance, I think go home and do more homework. It's going to facilitate the learning more and more. And then generally speaking, it takes about, for people who are motivated, takes about 2 to 3 visits for it to stick. For people who are not motivated, it can take a long time. And actually, it becomes really frustrating too, to the patient and to the provider, you know, to say, hey, you know, why can't we do any better? And then it'll be like, well, you know, I went to a party and I had something, and I'm like, well, what happened after the party? And we're like, well, I never went back. And you're like, well, why didn't you go back? It's like, well, basically they have basically severe insulin resistance, and then once they fall off the low carb wagon, the body stopped or basically forgot how to burn fat, and so now they feel really bad. And then to make them feel good, they have to go to add the carb to make them feel good again. And then so So it's a mixed bag, but majority of people that do the homework at home, I think actually have awesome results. I have people who have lost like 100. Actually, have 3 people losing more than 100 pounds within within a year. Actually, like 15 months. So
it's amazing. Is there ever a point where you get a certain patient and you're just like, okay, fine, just take your metformin, take your insulin, and we'll just do it that way, because they're just obviously not going to change their food habits?
Unfortunately, sometimes you have to do that. I mean, so ideally, you want to get them to fix the root cause, but sometimes it's just like, look, if you can't do it, I just can't hold medicine from you. Right. So we'll give you your medicine, and when you're ready, we'll maybe try this again. But in the back of your mind is you're like, oh, which string did I forget to pull? How can I get other people to move, but I can't get these people to move? And then so sometimes you start doubting, oh, are you doing the right thing? Have you learned everything there is to learn? Why can't you get the people, motivated? And then eventually, I think right now I'm at a point of not everyone is ready to do lifestyle change at the time of the doctor's choosing.
Right.
Their time, and then we are here to encourage them. And for most people will be like, wow, why didn't you tell me before? This is so much easier. And then for some people, like the big picture is some of those that are reluctant, I might have to say that they actually have, we call them food addiction. They actually are addicted to sugar, and then because they are so addicted to it, they just can't see their way out.
Yeah, that's definitely an issue. That's definitely an issue. That's why I really think that kind of the model of the future is an MD with his own practice with someone like a food addiction specialist, some kind of health coach there in the practice with them that is going at it from a different direction. Because I think sometimes it takes a tag team effort for some people. Some people respond to one way of doing things, other people respond to another way of doing things, and you just don't know until you just throw everything at them.
That's right.
So what does the future hold for Dr. Andy Phung?
The future is that maybe in a couple months I can open my own practice, and then people can come and we do membership. It's called direct primary care, basically like a gym membership. People pay 60, 70, 80 or whatever the price. I haven't come up with a price per month, and people can come and see me as their primary care doctor, and then and if they have chronic metabolic diseases, then I can teach them how to put their chronic diseases in remission through lifestyle and nutrition. And for people who want more than just the easy way, or I would say easy way, if they want intense lifestyle intervention, then I'm going to have 2 arms. The other arm is medical weight loss. So where we would see the patient more frequently, we would have internet link scales and blood pressure cuffs and things like that we can keep people in the right direction, versus like, hey, here's your food list, and then here's something to learn, and then go home and you pray that in about 2 months later the A1C will be good. So with these, we call them close monitoring. If people, quote, fall off, then you can see it right there, and you say, hey, you can pick up a phone and say, hey, Aaron, what's going on here? I'm seeing a spike within the last week. Oh, I went to, making it up here. I went to a party. I'm like, hey, the party's over. Hey, let's get back on what you need to do, versus the traditional way of, hey, you hope that they get back. So I think with these close monitoring will actually facilitate the change easier The biggest thing that I've learned is that for lifestyle changes, on average, for lifestyle changes to take hold, it takes up to 2 years for people to stick, because there's a lot of learning in between. So on average 2 years, but then I would say on average 2 years, but then there are some who will do it faster because they actually want to learn. For some who don't want to learn, that will be more than 2 years. So, but on average, takes about 2 years for lifestyle changes to stick.
Yeah, I'm convinced that for people who really have a problem, that a continuous glucose monitor that sends a text out to an accountability partner or something that can call them like as the cake is still in their mouth. hey, what are you doing? I think that would be the secret for some people.
No, it's most people don't know, but Freestyle Libre will actually, I think not the reader, but the sensor itself is about $60. Yeah. You actually don't need to get the reader. So if you just want to see how bad you eat, hey, get somebody to write you a Freestyle Libre, slap it on. If you have a smartphone, the app will read the reading, and you're going to be surprised how bad we eat.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think I'm going to get my wife's doctor to prescribe a CGM for her, because she doesn't cheat at all, but her last blood test, her A1C was higher than normal, and I'd like to see if maybe there's something that she's eating that's causing a reaction. Like I wonder if there's something else, because she doesn't eat sugar, she doesn't eat ingredients, she didn't eat anything that would cause her blood sugar to go up, but her A1C was like 5.9 or 6 last time. So I'm curious to see. And she's lost over 100 pounds. So
wow.
Again, I'm curious to see what would happen. What if there's something else that's causing a reaction. Okay, Dr. Phung, tell my people where they can follow you on social media, all that good stuff. If my people want to know more about you, where can they do all that?
Okay, I am on Twitter currently at Dr. Andy Phung, Phung. At Twitter, I'm gonna come up with my website. It's probably gonna be www.drandyphung.com when it's ready.
Buy it now if you haven't already. Somebody else is
I think we put down a payment on that.
Okay, good.
And then it's and that's it. So I'm new to the internet because I was doing a lot on my own. Yeah. But it's important to spread the message to the people, because supposedly the latest study is that 9 out of 10 American adults are metabolically sick, and 1 out of 3 children are metabolically sick. Mm-hmm. And what that really means is that we have lots and lots of sick people due to our standard American diet.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, the study was 12% of American adults are metabolically healthy. 12%. That is insane. So that's crazy. All right. Well, Dr. Phung, I'm going to put links to everything that you just mentioned there in the show notes. And guys, I would suggest that you follow him on Twitter. It's a good read. So Dr. Phung, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Aaron. Thanks for inviting me.
All right, guys. And we'll be right back with some more information.